Welcome to our panel dialogue today on World Mental Health Day. I'm very honored and excited, not nervous, thanks, Janice, about spending time with these wonderful people in the room. We are over 3 continents and 3 timelines or time zones, timelines. I've had some time issues already today. um, so thank you very much. I'm going to quickly introduce everyone just briefly, and then I will kind of lead us into what this might become. um, I'm going to go from my right. So I have Dr. Janice Campbell, wisdom seeker, member, and a good friend. Thank you so much. Janice is a recovering stage manager, acupuncturist, works with Chinese medicine and all things holistically wholesome, I think. Thank you. And Janice is joining us from Baltimore in Maryland. So thank you very much. Sue, my favorite astrologer. Sue has got a very interesting background as well. Written quite a few books, done a lot of work in the world of death and dying, and currently doing amazing things as an astrologer. My co-host on the Cosmic Echoes. I love talking to Sue about consciousness and our space. I think our place in on this planet and in this universe. So thank you, Sue. Sue's joining us from Somerset, in the UK. Wiltshire. Thank you, Sue. Stephanie Kunkel, also author of Perspectives Through Broken Glass, founder of the Perspective Shifters Hub, coach, leadership. There's so many things that you do, Steph. Also Wisdom Seekers member. Thank you so much for joining us from Wautoma, somewhere there up north in the middle-ish.
That's right, up north there, eh?
Then we have Chris Michelle, also author of the Red Chair Experience. I actually have both Chris and Stephanie's books here with me. Chris is currently training director of Service Nation. And when I met Chris, he was coach Chris. He has done some amazing things within the mental health world as well, dealt with a lot of loss. And his book is very amazing in that there's a little piece every day. So it's kind of I don't know, what would you call it, Chris?
It's a daily inspiration. It's a chance to get some light every day.
That's it. So thank you very much for joining us. Laura. Oh, and Chris is in Atlanta, Georgia. So towards the bottom right-ish side. So I see it. Laura, thank you so much. Laura is a coach and facilitator with Saffron Bagley and Associates in Johannesburg. Laura has worked a lot in the mental health world around. You ran the National Suicide Line for a while. You working with anxiety, depression, mental wellness, all those amazing things. So thank you so much for joining us as well, Laura. So dialogues. This is a little bit different. You're welcome. This is a little bit different in that we are not working towards an outcome. We're not looking to solve anything here. In the dialogue, specifically inspired by David Bohm's work, we are looking at ways to change the way we think, and to share ideas rather than convince each other of anything. We kind of work with 4 main foundational principles, and those are that it's a participatory process. So in life, we always participating in things. We are connected. We are part of a bigger, or of a whole. we work with suspension. So we are suspending judgment and really just working towards curiosity and sharing meaning being the third one, instead of pushing our point or convincing someone of anything. And then in the fourth kind of foundational element, it's all about hosting ourselves. So sometimes we might not be able to express what we want to, but in essence, all the magic happens within ourselves. So we aiming to work towards listening, having an authentic voice, radical respect, and suspending judgment. So I invite you, and I'm going to hear everybody's voices in the room. I'm going to open with a check-in question. And this is always very difficult because I'm trying not to guide the dialogue in a specific way. And yeah, I know you can imagine that it's not so easy. So I'm not trying to guide it, but I'm going to ask kind of, where do you feel the source of balance lies for you right now in the world?
You're starting off with an easy one, Michelle.
Yeah, I don't do easy very well.
Here, I'll jump in.
Okay.
As I've told you before, this year, 2024, and particularly since July, has felt like both my family and I have been living through the Taoist parable of the farmer and his horse. You know, the farmer's horse runs away. All his neighbors say that's terrible. He says, maybe. The horse brings back 5 wild horses. Everybody says, that's great. He says, maybe. His son gets on to break one of the horses and falls off and breaks his leg. And everybody says, that's terrible. And he said, maybe. Then the army comes through to conscript all the young men, and they can't take him because he's got a broken leg. And everybody says, what's great news? And it's, maybe. That's kind of how our life has been for 2024. Deaths, exciting opportunities, everything in between. And so asking about the question of balance, it's really interesting because I've come to the place where that surfing that wave that is always changing for us right now, for me, is all about being comfortable and not knowing, in waiting for whatever the next one is and being able to move with it rather than deciding how I'm going to move with it ahead of time, or trying to push the river, as a friend of mine says. So that for me is to sort of be relaxed and not knowing, flexible and not knowing, is where I'm finding it right now anyway.
Mm-hmm. That's a big one. It's not an easy one.
Michelle, can I jump in there?
Yes, of course.
Janice, I think what you said resonated so much with me, right? Like the world that we live in, we're constantly playing this juggling act, right, of what's next and that element of not knowing. And I can see everyone's nodding their heads because we're all like, that's what we don't know how to just go with the flow. And it's that, I think that's probably the most anxiety provoking thing for us all, is just being able to say, I'm okay with what's next. And I think that's where most of our anxiety comes from, of that element of not knowing and actually just letting go of the fact that we can't control everything. So coming around like back to that question of like, where do we find that balance? That balance has to come from within, right? And asking ourselves, like, what do I need right now? That's something that I'm kind of trying to challenge myself, and we often challenge clients, of asking ourselves, like, what do we really need, and listening to ourselves. And I'm starting, I mean, it's a daily practice, just like Chris's book, it's a daily practice. And I thought when you said it's something every day, I said, well, that's how we look after our mental health, is every day, right? But yeah, that finding that balance within and asking yourself, like, what do I need? How do I let go? How do I surrender to the fact of I don't know what's coming next. But I resonate where you are, Janice.
I think for me, it's lately, I see what Janice is talking about. I mean, there's the highs, there's the lows, what do you do and how do you work with it? Back in September, I went to a training class and we talked about paradigms and how our paradigms really dictate our lives, right? And how they can really shape and form the things that we know, and understanding what that word means. Because to me, it was just a word. It was like, oh, it's just paradigm. It's no big deal. No, it's your past. It's your stories. It's the things you believe. It's the things you've conjured in your head. And that becomes reality. That becomes your truth. And so for me lately, I've did a lot of research, and this is how I work. I do a lot of research on something, and then when I decide to do it, I just jump right in. And so I've been working a lot with grounding, physically grounding myself, because when I'm in my office, or when I'm in Texas, at my office in Texas, I don't get a lot of chance to get outside. I can easily be in my house for 2 days straight without even stepping outside, which is crazy. Yeah, Janice is like, what the heck is wrong with you? That's the thing with me, Janice. That's just one. But for me, understanding the importance and feeling the difference of grounding and what that looks like. And so I'm currently working a lot with grounding and physical grounding, right? And I'm standing right now in my office, barefoot on and being grounded, right? I'm on a grounding pad right now. So it's things like that I've realized recently, even with the highs and the lows, I have to be grounded, and whether it's a mental thing or a physical thing, that's where I'm finding my if you will, my base, my standard is to be grounded. Because once I'm grounded, then everything else can do what it needs to do. And living in the States, especially in the Southeast, we do a lot and hear a lot about hurricanes. The last 2 weeks have been horrible. And it's all about being grounded, right? It's about if you can keep your ground, and sometimes you get blown back and forth and you get really wet, and it loosens the ground that you're standing on, but it's all about the foundation, and can you keep that foundation? So
I'm happy to jump in as well here, just to follow on from that, because for me, I think my life journey has really taught me to listen to what's real and what isn't, and what is drama and what isn't the drama. And yeah, I think I go through a constant process of sifting and feeling in my body about, is this my truth, or is it am I getting sucked into something that isn't really in the long run going to help me or anyone else around me? So I'm curious about this. The reason I chose to come on the panel is because I suffered from chronic depression for an extended period of my life. And I feel so grateful to be through that now. I'm always conscious that, Churchill talked about the black dog at his ankles. And I'm always curious and I'm always conscious of that. But I've been free of this chronic depression for a long time. So I'm very curious about when I don't feel alive. And I know something isn't right. And that's what depression has taught me. So I feel we are going through, well, as we all know, we're going through massive changes on the planetary level, as well on the human condition level. And so I feel, for me, it is when I feel my innate joy of life is being sucked out of me, that's when I take a step back and I sift through, hang on a minute, what is my truth? And when I go back to that, then I actually feel I have the resilience to meet what is coming to us.
Michelle, I love that you started with balance. Like Sue, I have really been challenged in my past with depression. And still, like you said, Sue, like Churchill said, the black dog is still there. I call it a black hole because, like you said, it sucks all of the joy and the light out. And suddenly you're in this massive, gravitational pull that you have to pull yourself out of. But balance, I find, is the piece that I think it has been missing for a really long time in the mental health space. That we chronically see people who are struggling with depression or anxiety, and we want to fix them and we want to make them better. And this year, I set a mantra at the beginning of the year, and it was breathe more in 2024. And really, it was kind of around that same space of grounding myself and getting more in tune with my body and finding the expansiveness that just is breath. In fact, Tim and I were talking about that last night as we were preparing for bed, about how when we take a deep breath, everything kind of tenses as we expand, and then we just release, and it's like everything just kind of floats away. And I think that breathing is so powerful in that grounding moment. But I also think that there is an aspect of being able to accept the feelings that are somewhat uncomfortable for what they are, and allow them, instead of shutting them down, which I think is a lot of what we do and we're conditioned to do from a very young age, is shut those emotions down, shut the feelings down. You can't cry. You can't get angry. Those are emotions we don't want to deal with. So we shut them out. We shut them down and shut them out. And then suddenly they're not there anymore. And then nothing is there. There's no joy. There's no laughter. And I think that we, as a society, have to get better at accepting those uncomfortable emotions and encouraging people to allow them in so that we can process them and move them through our bodies. That's been a big learning of mine this year, is the energetic pool that comes with anger is very easily turned into a movement. And it doesn't have to be, clenched fist, and it can be something as simple as dancing, and something as simple as just literally moving to a different space in the room. But I think the balance is the key for me in some of the work that I've been doing. I worked with a client yesterday. It was the first thing she'd ever heard that anybody had ever told her it was okay that she stayed in bed for the day. She was like, wait, that's okay? And I was like, yeah, obviously we don't want to experience our life like that, but it's all right to sometimes need a day in bed,
Well, I think that comes back to what some of you have heard me go on and on about, which is listening to what our bodies want. Because this whole division of body, mind, spirit is artificial anyway. And symptoms are a way, whether they're on any level, are a way of getting our attention. And then from there, seeing how that needs to move, how that needs to play out, because that's where, when the constraint happens on an emotional level or a physical level, it's going to eventually bleed into other levels, and it's going to eventually make us sick or in a lot of pain. And learning how to move that, so because it's your body saying something's wrong, and it's also your body saying it in a way that you knew before you knew words. Because sometimes the words that we get given for a particular full body, full being response to the world when we're small aren't the ones that really fit what's happening. When you see this a lot in people that have had abusive or neglected childhoods, they get really weird definitions for the word love or the word safety or even fear, because they're getting a definition that didn't fit what their full body response was. And so then they had to try and reconcile that. And so it's all about moving it. And moving it doesn't necessarily mean moving. Sometimes it means staying in bed all day. Like your body's saying, we need to rest. But what you're doing is you're moving that constraint that is trying to make you do but not do. That's trying to, which is my, but you can't really try to do anything.
And I think a lot of what all of you have said, and what you now specifically said, Janice, is around meaning. We, even in our own bodies, in our own understanding of what's happening around us and within us, we don't always understand the meaning because we've inherited it. We've accepted it from outside of ourselves instead of from within. And this quote that I started this off with, Krishnamurti, who is a very good friend of David Bohm's, is he said it's no measure of health to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society. And I think that's where there's so much in there. I mean, this is a quote from 1975 or something like that, and it's just becoming more. So how do we do that? What each of you have said, how do we kind of switch off from the outside and go within to go, well, where am I in all of this?
Yeah, can I just come in here? Because I just feel like it's very, what I'm learning, especially as an astrologer, is how important it is not to compare your life with anyone else's. How you respond to something will be very unique to you. And my issue is that we're living in a homogenized society where there is an expectation for everyone to behave in a certain way. And it's a very competitive society. It's a very doing society. So people who are more, I call it yin, they have a more yin experience of life, are more receptive or more introverted, are more needing to retreat kind of energy. They find it really tough. And I feel like the most important thing anyone can do for themselves is to know thyself. I mean, those were the sacred words above the Temple of Delphi. Know thyself. And I would say to anyone who is struggling at the moment about how to deal with the craziness of life is to understand how you personally, what you personally need. And it will be probably very different from the people that you live with or your friends or the community around you. It is absolutely understanding the core essence of who you are. And when I learnt that myself, my life radically changed. And that's when the depression shifted for me.
Just to add on to there what Sue was saying, and Sue, this world that we live in, and this perception that we develop of how we should be living. And, going back to also what Michelle was saying, was that this balance and the noise that Sue mentioned, and that's the noise, right? Is being able to center ourselves and understand, okay, well, what is me? What do I need? And these feelings that we are told as children, as adults, still as men, as women, to not feel, we only reinforce the society around us. And I think it's through conversations like what we're having today. It's kind of slowly breaking down that stigma and saying, hey, it's okay to talk about these things. In fact, you need to talk about these things. And perhaps some of the viewers that are watching today maybe have never had the opportunity to hear, people talk about these things and this vulnerability. And I think if there's the most important thing for me is what Stephanie said earlier about how we're told not to feel these feelings, and it's not okay to be in bed, and it's not okay to be sad. But in fact, there is great strength in being vulnerable and feeling those feelings. There is great strength. Yeah.
And I think there's another quote that I live by, and it was wrongly misattributed a couple of times. It was actually a quote or a tweet or something, but it is Debbie Hope that she mentioned, before you diagnose yourself with depression, make sure that you're not surrounded by assholes. And that for me is pretty much, where are you? Are you able to connect to yourself in your environment, or are you being told that you need to change? Because I feel that the mental health industry, which has become an industry that profits from people suffering, is very quick to tell us how we should change and which pill is going to make us better, or which 5-step program is going to fix everything, which I think we need to find ways to distance ourselves from that industry perspective, in a way as well.
Well, and it comes back to also actually looking at the phenomena of what's going on. Because you stump your toe when you're having a bad day and you complain about it all day and you tell people about it and you get as much sympathy as possible. And you stump your toe on the day that you fall in love or you win $1 million and you're like, I have a toe. Isn't this great? And it doesn't change the actual physical response that you stumped your toe and that you got a signal to your brain saying, hey, that hurt. And so also tracking the actual phenomenon instead of the story that we've made up about what somebody else thinks or what, all those things. And also allow, in the same way that we, the story I use with my patients and clients a lot is that, back to the stump toe, whenever we hurt ourselves in that way, we try to wall off that part of our body and sort of ignore it. like it's not there. That's not my toe down there screaming. And what you actually do when you do that is you slow the healing process, because you're telling your body to shut off communication with that toe. So white blood cells aren't getting down there to repair things. Stuff's not moving. If you actually allow yourself to feel the toe or feel the depression or feel the, whatever the thing is that you need to feel, or the anger is often it, because often anger is what turns back into depression. If you let yourself feel it and move through it, and then your toe quits hurting sooner. Because you're thinking, oh, it needs to be rubbed, or oh, it needs hot water, or oh, and you're listening, as many people have said so far, to what you need.
Yeah. I think. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Sue.
Okay. What's come to me is what we're talking about really is the hero's or the heroine's journey, the hero and the heroine's journey back to who they are. And that takes enormous courage and tenacity of spirit and willingness to step forward and knowing and being utterly present, saying and ritualizing, I am stepping into my healing journey and taking responsibility for that. And I feel for me, it was for my own journey really began when I fully embraced the concept of the victim, persecutor, rescuer triangle, and that I was constantly giving away my power by entering into one of those archetypal energies. And I think when I work with clients now, it is about enabling them to see, are they in that archetype? Is their story that archetype, a part of that archetypal triangle? And ritualizing, as I said, this sort of sense of, if you want to heal, you truly do want to, you're saying, I need to change, then you are absolutely stepping onto that heroine's or hero's journey back to yourself and to everyone who does it.
Yeah.
I think that journey is so powerful too, Sue. And I love that you brought up what here in the States we call it the drama triangle is what I think Western mental health professionals call it. And it was so eye-opening when I learned about it, just because of the family dynamics and the relationship dynamics that I was in on a constant basis. I was like, oh. But I want to touch a little bit back on what Janice and Chris were saying too, around how it's really our perspective that kind of drives a lot of what we do. And that was a very powerful realization for me too, learning about the way that the brain works and that it really continually works to kind of prove us right. And so we seek out evidence in our day to day to say, yes, you are correct, right? You bought this car and now you're seeing it everywhere because it was a good choice, right? So now as somebody who works in the perspective field, if you will, it's a lot of what I'm trying to, that message that I'm trying to help people with is to help them realize that, like Janice said, if you stub your toe on one day, it may not affect you in the same way. Not that the pain's not there, not that it doesn't hurt the same, but that you just don't experience it in the same way. And I think the way that we experience life, Michelle, and I think that you've said this before, that aspect, and maybe it was Diana that said that when you dip your toe in the river, right, that river is never the same at any given second. And I feel like when people can live in the moment, again, breathing more, if you will, and living in that moment, grounding, like Chris was talking about earlier, it allows us to realize that our perspective is the experiences of our past and that our perspective can shift in the moment. And that's why I'm so passionate about this subject and how it works within the world. Because understanding just that nugget of information, that seed of wisdom can really change somebody's life at any given moment.
And that's a lot. Dialogue does a lot of that for me, learning about it, because it is a process. All of this is a process, and in that process everything changes constantly. There's no river runs straight. If we're going to go with the river thing, because it seems to be quite prominent in the conversation, but our thoughts create our perceptions of reality. So if we can step out of that thoughts and those patterns and notice that they are patterns, and kind of move out of the rules or the laws of thought, so that we can have a different perspective.
Well, it's interesting. It's along those lines of being in the moment and understanding the emotional side of things. And if we could as a society learn how to be in the moment and not think ahead or think behind or right. And I know this sounds kind of trite, but if we could be in the moment, if we could learn to live in I stubbed my toe, it's going to hurt. Okay, what am I feeling? How am I doing? What's going on right now? What's happening? And when we run that course of that moment in that time, then guess what? Now I can move on to, I can win the lottery. Oh, I broke up with my significant other. Oh, I had this, situation. Oh, I got the dream job, whatever. But too often we're carrying things from moment to moment, and we never really deal with it, and we never really allow it to run its course. And so our paradigm, our mindset shifts to, well, October always sucks because my brother died and this happened and that happened and I broke up with so-and-so and I had the worst month ever and I did this so Octobers always suck. No, they don't. But guess what? If you continue to think that way, Octobers will always suck. Octobers will always be bad, right? Life is what you make it. And again, I know that sounds really trivial and really, really trite, but it's when you can fully grasp and understand the power of this moment. And I know I say this a lot for those of you who know me, I say this a lot. You're exactly where you need to be right now. And understanding that, I had lunch with my friend Kevin the other day and I said, we're exactly where we need to be. And he goes, I'm having a hard time seeing that. Right? Because in the moment, there was a lot of things that were happening that may not have been what he had hoped for, what he'd wished for. And I've been there too, right? I don't feel like I'm exactly supposed to be here. But what if you are? Mm-hmm. What if you're exactly where you need to be right now so that you can see the things that you're supposed to see? I have friends that are dealing with the tragedy in Florida right now with not one, but two hurricanes, right? And everything that's going on around them. And of course, we can jump to the, oh, I never should have done this. I never should have bought this property. I never should have moved to Florida. Right? I never should have blah, blah, blah. But what if you needed to be there because your neighbor needed to hear how refreshing your mindset is on that day when it says, you know what, could be worse.
Mm-hmm.
I'm in a good place. I'm alive. I got my family. I got my friends, right? I got support. I've got the things that I need. Mentally, I'm okay. Maybe that person needed to hear it, And so I extend you're exactly where you need to be right now, but it may not be for you.
And that kind of reminds me or brings me back to identity. What do we base or form our identity around? Is it that I'm a homeowner or that I'm a, whatever it is? Can we remove ourselves from that as being our primary grounding space, I suppose?
Mm-hmm.
Well, and I was going to say that because sorry, Chris, somebody asked me just the other day, who are you without what you have, what you do, what people need from you, your relationship to other people? Who are you when you're just you? And I think that brings us back to the present moment, right? Because if we're just us moving from moment to moment to moment, that's a lot lighter than dragging all these things with us or dealing with all the stories we have or that other people have about us. If we're just us, if we're just the person inside that's not somebody's mom or friend or brother or boss or enemy or next door neighbor or whatever it is, or the person that has this skill, if I'm not an acupuncturist, if I'm not a distance mind body integration specialist, if I'm not a former stage manager. I mean, who am I if I'm not all those pieces that describe me? And it's a really sort of lovely, refreshing exercise. It's a little disorienting at first, but it's a lovely, refreshing exercise because, again, as Chris says, it brings you back to, oh, I'm right here. Of course I'm right here because this is where I should be. At least that's my experience of it.
That reminds me of something that I often think about, and all of us together are having this experience right now, that every single thing since the time we were born, every thought, everything that we've done, every action has brought us to this absolute moment to be together right now doing this talk. And I find that when I think of it in that way, I find that incredible. Yeah. That there is, I don't know if that, maybe life is conspiring or whatever it is. For me, that doesn't matter. But I feel like that if you think of the fact that everything you have done has brought you to this moment right now, is this moment okay for you? Are you feeling fulfilled? Are you feeling like you've got meaning and purpose in your life? Are you feeling like, life's cool? Or have you, are you struggling? And if you're struggling, I think it's such a good time to assess and go, okay, I need to make some changes. So the next moment that I am brought to and I think of this, then I can reflect back and think, yes, I did the right thing. I made the right choices. I started my hero or heroine's journey back to myself.
Mm-hmm. Michelle,
and Sue, what you...
Sorry, go ahead, Laura.
Thanks, Chris. I was just saying what Sue was saying there about, being able to bring ourselves back to ourselves, and be able to stop the noise and be able to ask ourselves these questions. In the world and the society we live in, we don't often get that opportunity, to become aware of our internal narrative either. We go from moment to moment to moment, and we actually have to become a little bit more intentional. And may that be, when you're drinking your cup of coffee, and, being a little bit more mindful and asking yourself those questions, having a mantra, like Stephanie said, breathe more in 2024. I love that. I'm going to inherit it, even though it's almost 2025. Or, doing a grounding exercise and checking in with yourself. And I think that's it's a powerful tool that we can all implement into our lives, and it can literally change our life.
I must just say, I tattooed breathe on my forearm in Sanskrit, just in case I forgot, because I find it so grounding. But sometimes, everything kind of takes you out of your body, as Janice would say, and just to bring yourself back is quite powerful. And breath is, I suppose, the most important thing we have to ground ourselves with, because without that we won't be in this physical form for long.
Mm-hmm. Well, and the important thing to remember is that our body's not the same.
Mm-hmm.
We're shedding cells and building new ones, and we have a physical habit of being this version of us. And I learned this when I was speaking to a colleague who had a patient who had multiple personalities. And when that patient would come in to see her, depending on which personality they were slightly different in height. Their breasts were slightly prominent or more receded. Their physical allergies were different. One personality was allergic to strawberries violently. Another personality was not. And 1,000 other little tiny bits and pieces. And so we have a physical habit of being this physical version of ourselves. And so how we live into it, how we live into this multiple layers of density, as I call it, is to some degree a choice. One of my favorite stories from a mentor of mine was he had a patient who was a super outdoorsy and athletic and whatnot, and he in a moment's notice was in a motorcycle accident and became a quadriplegic. And that was the first time they met, was when he came in for acupuncture. And he was pissed off that he had not died, because everything he loved was gone. And the whole treatment plan that my mentor came up with was to accentuate the things that were going well in their life, in this person's life, rather than focus on the things that couldn't change. And after 6 months, a year, or something like that, of kind of just easily stretching that envelope, patient comes in and he says, "So how are the bed sores doing?" "I don't know. I can't feel them. I'm not the person that has to deal with them. But let me tell you what my student's doing. Or let me tell you about what this book I'm writing." So that it's possible for us, no matter what happens to us on any level, it's possible for us to find a fluidity and an adaptation to still seek life, to still find out what juices us in a way that is life affirming, that is moving forward, that is putting us back in the right place, even if it's suddenly in a body that doesn't do what we want it to do.
This is to take away from the horror, for my understanding of it, by the way, of becoming a paraplegic. I thank you so much that my life experiences have not given me that as yet. But I just think there is this, one of the teachings that's always helped me to get a sort of a broader perspective on life is the fact that we are just passing through. And life is an experience that we've come here to learn and to understand the human condition and have this physical experience. And that's always profoundly helped me when I have been up shit's creek without a paddle, let's say. So yes, that's always been very helpful, that it is, I look at, we're learning, we've come here to learn in whatever context that we experience that.
And everything we do here teaches.
Absolutely.
Everybody that's around us, in the grocery store line with us, wherever, we're giving away, to the world what we want the world to be like in some ways. I do want to add that the work that was done with that quadriplegic patient wasn't just about, oh, look at all the sunshine and the roses. It was also processing the grief. It was processing the loss. It was allowing that to move through and transform so that there was room for all the emotions to come back. It wasn't just like, look on the bright side of life.
Toxic positivity.
Yeah.
Chris, I know you are. There's something that you need to say. I can feel it.
No, there's always something, right? I mean, for me, there's sometimes I come to something like this and I think, oh, I'm gonna share and I'm gonna teach and I'm gonna be this person, and then I go, oh crap, I've got so much to learn. Or maybe I'm in a spot where, and you just reminded me of this, Michelle, was that with the grief, I don't think we understand the fullness of grief. And what I mean by that is, if we let's be something as trivial as I lost my fingernail, okay? And I say it's trivial because for me, I'm a guy, I don't care about my fingernails other than they're there to protect my fingers. But if we lose something that has meaning to us, that's grief, right? And if we don't process that, and I'm not saying we need to have a full-on pity party, but we have to process that, right? The joy of hearing from a friend who's in a horrible situation and they're happy and they're good and things are turning around for them. That's a moment in time to absorb that emotion, right? Take that in and sit with it. It's okay to sit with it, right? It's I find myself often reading a book or watching a show or something, and I feel this wave of emotion, and it may be grief because of this situation, or it may be joy or happiness, but to be able to just sit in it and to feel it, to feel the goosebumps or the chills or whatever, right? To be able to let that just literally flow through us. I don't think we do that enough as a society, as a person, right? And so those are the things I think of as we're sitting and talking about being in the moment or doing these things. Or Michelle, we were talking about perspectives earlier and different people seeing themselves in different roles. Janice, you were talking about different roles and how we get identity from that. And Michelle, as a trained psychologist, you understand the role identity that some people are just ingrained with, right? I have to live a certain way. I'm a husband, I'm a father, I'm a child, I'm a son, I'm a brother, I'm a whatever. I'm in this role, and this is the role I play, and I get identity from that role. That's okay, but at the end of the day, Janice, like you were saying, if you strip all that stuff away, who are you?
Mm-hmm.
Right? What is that underneath? What's the gooey caramel center, right? And those are the things that I'm thinking of as we're sitting here and we're talking through this stuff. But those are the things that are just processing for me. Is I love these conversations because of what they bring. I'm fascinated by the collaboration and the things that Janice says, and then Sue says, and then Laura says, and Stephanie brings up, and right, and Michelle. It's just all of these things, and for me, I'm exactly where I need to be. Bring it all full circle. You're welcome.
Yeah, Chris, I kind of want to just mention too that I think that a lot of people expect grief to be this heavy, long-lasting thing. I think the conception is that you're grieving the loss of a family member or, a large thing that's super, super important to you. And I think that people don't understand that our body experiences grief, honestly, on a day-to-day basis. And this is something that I've had to kind of come to terms with, is that, the change of season is not something that we often think about as something that we grieve. But as we move into fall here in Wisconsin, I find myself grieving the daylight. And it's my body is heavily affected by it, even though I'm not necessarily conscious of it. And I think that's something that a lot of people don't, I think as a society, we just don't understand the power, like you said, that comes with just embracing that. I've talked before to organizations, and we talk about how the change of something starts a grief process, right? If you're on your way to work and there's construction in the middle of the road and you're late to work, there is a grieving process that happens from, again, like going back to what Jana said, the person I thought I was, who was 5 minutes early to everything, because if I wasn't, I was late. And now I'm late. And my route is not as serene and peaceful as it used to be. And I think that it's so important that, again, we go back to balance. Michelle, I love that you started this conversation with that question, because there is a balance. There's a balance. I've said this before. Life is like a roller coaster, right? We have our ups and we have our downs and we have our twists and turns, and we can't appreciate it if we don't have all of that. Nobody would go to theme parks if we just had roller coasters that were flat, right? So as we move through life, embracing all of it, the whole rich, and I think somebody called it juicy, and that's how I describe it too. It's just so rich and juicy and succulent, and it's just such an amazing experience. And even the things that are hard, and even the things that are uncomfortable, and even the things that we've been conditioned for so long to think that they're bad, maybe.
Yeah.
Thanks for the seasonal nod, Steph, because a lot of the work that I do is about reintegrating myself and guiding other people to reintegrate into the flow of nature. And this time of year in the Northern Hemisphere, we're in fall, we're in autumn. And so what's happening outside? Things are dying back. Energy is being consolidated and pulled back into the ground to store over the winter, to get through the winter, so that things can push up out of the ground again in the spring. And we're part of that. It's no surprise that Day of the Dead happens in autumn. And any number of other cultural holidays all around the globe, they are mirrored in the seasons in a very deep way most of the time. And the more we can learn that we are part of that cycle, we are nature. We're not observers. We're not, apex predators, although we are, but we're part of that whole flow. And the more we can live in that, the more we can sleep more when it's winter. The more we have more activity in the summer, the healthier we are, and the healthier all the rest of that is.
And Janice, honestly, I don't know that I would have recognized that it was grief or that it was the seasonal aspect that I was going through. We have in the States, we call it seasonal affective disorder. And that drives me insane now that I kind of understand how all of this works. And it is important to recognize that these things happen. And if I hadn't met you, that never would have happened. And I love this group because there's so many different rich experiences that come to light within what we do and the conversations that we have. And there's so much to learn from each other. And like Chris was saying, I'm always at the right place at the right time, especially with this group.
And the other piece too is that there's fall. I mean, that in fall there is also awe. There's unbelievable beauty that is paired with grief.
Absolutely.
Because if you're grieving something was of value, even if it's just that I'm the person that shows up 5 minutes early.
Right.
You can't grieve without being aware of beauty and attachment and value. Because otherwise you don't care if it's gone. And it doesn't matter. But it's two sides of that coin, which is why fall is such a perfect example seasonally, although it happens all the way around the year. Because that first fall day is, and all the leaves are turning, and it's, oh, wow, that is gorgeous. And they're gorgeous because they're dying back.
You know, Janet, and Michelle knows this because we talk about this quite a bit. One of my, an author I got a chance to speak to the other day, well, a couple months ago. Malcolm Gladwell was having a conversation with Rick Rubin, and they were talking about loss, and they were talking about Malcolm grieving the loss of his father and the present that it was. Think about that for a second. The present of it, the present of the grief. The present is that you love someone enough that now you grieve them, right? And that's what I think about for grief. When you talk about grief and what we get from it, you should be, and I know this is hard to understand, but being or happy with the fact that you have this feeling called grief because you miss or you lost something that you had, and that something was wonderful to you. It may be the sunlight during the day of 12, 14 hours of sunlight or whatever it is. It could be as simple as the quote that was mentioned earlier, no man can return to the same river because the river has changed and so has the man, right? You can't go back to that same river twice. It just doesn't happen. The ability to lose something is awesome, as crazy as that sounds. But the ability to lose that something now turns into grief. Well, that's a presence, right? And so understanding, I had that aha moment when I heard that with Malcolm and Rick. I was like, holy crap. And so when I got the chance to meet him, that's the thing I said to him. I said, when you guys had this conversation, that stuck with me. And he turned at me and looked at me like, wow, okay, cool. Right. Now, we didn't get to further the conversation, which would have been a different story. But for me, I look at that as an opportunity, right? To say, hey, thank you for helping me to see this in a different light, in a different perspective.
Exactly. And that's a perfect place to kind of draw this together, because it's all about, how do we achieve wholeness in a society that profits on our disconnection, on our disconnect, and for me, that's wellness, is wholeness. Which has shadows and light in the whole of it. So thank you. I am so grateful for each of you and each of your perspectives and insights, and I always walk out of here feeling different, like the river and the person, because I am now different once again. So I invite each of you just to check out with a sentence or a thought that you'd like to leave in this space.
I'm happy to go first on that one. Just to say, to remember that we live in a conscious universe, which is far greater than the human condition.
I think of Simon Sinek. That's the first thing I thought of was Simon Sinek. And it was the thing that he signs off with every time. Be kind to yourself and be kind to others.
I think mine would be that there is strength in vulnerability.
Thank you. And a favorite quote of mine from Piet Hein, who was both an engineer and a poet. I learned it, I think, my freshman year of high school, is living is a thing you do. Now or never, which do you?
It's hard to kind of wrap this up because I feel so full. And so my heart is so full. But I think I'm just going to go back to what you said, Michelle, because it's just so perfect for today's. Just embrace the balance, embrace all of it, embrace the experience.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, everyone.